going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Over the last few weeks, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama spoke to large and small crowds throughout Southwest Ohio, leaving pundits to speculate about who had the lead, who had the momentum. The popular opinion was that the race was tight. On Tuesday, the voters settled that question, leaving Hillary Clinton smiling and Barack Obama explaining why a 10-point defeat in Ohio isn't what it seems. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. In the weeks before the Ohio primary, dueling polls predicted everything from close victories for Obama or Clinton to comfortable wins for one or the other. On Tuesday, the voters silenced the speculation with decisive 10-point victory for Hillary Clinton. Interestingly, the day before the election, the Ohio poll, operated by the Institute for Policy Research at the University of Cincinnati, released its results, which predicted a Clinton victory by 9 points. For a little post-election analysis and a discussion of polling, I am joined now by Eric Rademacher, the director of the Ohio poll at the Institute for Policy Research. Eric, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thanks for having me.
As you know, during campaign season, I don't talk about polls and the horse race, but it's always fun to look at this afterwards. And I think it's necessary for me to reveal that I am on the advisory board. I have no direct influence on the polling, but I am on the advisory board at the Institute. So, another conflict of interest for me. So what? Anyway, Eric, obviously your poll that came out the day before was very close to what the final results were. Do you think that's because you were doing that poll so close to the election? When did you do that poll and when were you talking to people?
Well, that final UC Ohio poll was conducted over the last 4 days of the campaign, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And traditionally that's how we've done the polling. We do it right up till the final Sunday before the election, and then we come out on the Monday before the election with a projection.
And it looks to me like, if I know how to read any of these things, that for the Democratic side, you interviewed 613 people. Mm-hmm. You know, people always say about polls, well, how can they figure out from 613? And other polls, by the way, going into this, didn't agree with the Ohio poll.
Right.
They were all over the map.
Yeah.
Do you talk to those other pollsters? Do you guys communicate? Is this a little community of its own?
It is a little community of its own. There is a lot of communication back and forth. And certainly in the period after the election, we're all going back and talking about what worked, or for those who weren't as accurate, what maybe they could have done differently. So there is still an ongoing conversation about those polls, even though the election circus is now moving on to other states.
One of the polls, the Zogby poll, was way off, wasn't it?
It was. It showed an even race, but in fact there were a number of polls that also showed a very close race. Early on, there were people questioning why our poll was showing first an 8-point lead and then a 9-point lead for Senator Clinton. But all along, we felt pretty confident in the way that we model the electorate in Ohio. Since we're in Ohio, I think we have a good sense of the voters of the state, and our record has been pretty good in that regard.
Well, how do you get those 613 people? When you say that you model the poll, what does that mean? How do you identify who you're going to call here?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. We call folks on the telephone, we randomly select them. We first determine whether there's registered voters living in the household. Once we do, we randomly select a registered voter, and then the way we determine who is in the electorate is we ask people. We talk to them about their interest in the election, and we ask them how likely they are to vote. And those who say they're extremely interested and those who say they're definitely going to vote tend to make up a large percentage of the voters in our model that we then do a projection of Election Day with.
Ohio's a big place. Ohio's a complicated place. Do you try to, in terms of your random calling, do you try to say we've got to have so many from this part of the state, so many from that part of the state, so many rural, so many suburban, so many urban? voters? Do you have to have that kind of mix to know what you're dealing with?
Well, when you're finished, you absolutely have to have that mix. And the way that our samples are drawn, they're drawn by population. So just by the randomness of the survey itself, we're going to have more calls in the more populous areas of the state, which then will convert over to oftentimes what turnout looks like across the state of Ohio.
Well, one of the really practical things that I know you must have faced is that in the Democratic election, which was still very contested, but it was down to two people. Okay,
Right.
It was down to Senators Obama and Clinton. But on the ballot, there were still the names of John Edwards and also Congressman Kucinich were
Right.
still on that Ohio ballot. But they're no longer players, really. What do you do about that in a polling situation?
Well, our tradition has been to always ask the ballot, and we followed through with the tradition. We did receive some questions about why we were asking not only about Clinton and Obama, but about Edwards and Kucinich, and traditionally we have done that. We have asked about all the candidates that the voters will actually see. Most other polls decided not to. It's really interesting, I think, in our final results that that decision may have caused a little bit of an error for our projection, in that we saw more people telling us on the phone that they would vote for Edwards than actually did. But we also asked a second question of Edwards voters. We asked them, well, if you didn't vote for Edwards, once you got to the polling place, who would you vote for? And by far those voters chose Hillary Clinton. So even though in our projection, I think we had a little bit of an overestimate of Edwards, the answer is still in the poll that we did, that those who did probably at the end have a change of heart among Edwards voters tend to decide more with Hillary Clinton than Barack Obama.
Because that's that problem of going in, even though if you were a strong Edwards supporter, you might that day say, wait a minute, I'm not going to waste my vote. I am going to vote for one of these other two. And you're saying they then broke for Clinton.
Right. I think in the end, the Edwards voting turned more into a disagreement with either of the two top candidates than it did for support for Edwards.
The other thing that was going on in Ohio, and it's probably the big story on Election Day itself, and it was certainly the big story the day after, trying to figure out what was going on, was all the crossover voting. All of the Republicans who either filled out the 10W form and officially got a Democratic ballot, or we all know that there were thousands of Republicans who walked in, asked for the Democratic ballot, weren't challenged, and just went ahead and voted in the Democratic primary. How does a poll like yours, and everybody says it's unprecedented, the crossover vote, how do you account for that? I mean, did you account for that? Did you see that happening in your poll?
Well, we thought we did, and I think Election Day did confirm it. If you notice in our poll, we went out to interview randomly as many Democrats and Republicans as we could. But what we found more and more as we were conducting the interviews, that far more people were telling us they were going to vote in the Democratic primary than were saying that they were going to vote in the Republican primary. And when you look at our past history in primaries, it was different. There was something different going on. And I think we'll have to wait to see the actual registered voter rolls as they're updated by the counties. But when you look at what happened on Election Day, especially comparing a year like 2004, the last primary, to today, you see big differences in the number of Democrats who turned out in 2004 versus Republicans, and then what you see in 2008. So something clearly happened, but we'll have to see how much crossover it was. It may have also been something else we saw in the poll, and that was independent voters deciding now was an actual time they were going to finally take a partisan ballot. So we'll need to wait and see.
Well, one thing I do want to point out, you also did poll in the Republican race, in
We did.
the McCain, Huckabee, Romney, Paul race. And how did your numbers, I don't have those for the screen, but McCain you had estimated at a little over 53 and Huckabee at 23. How did that turn out?
Well, again, I think there we had the same issue where we had other candidates on the ballot who, in the end, we heard were going to receive votes in the poll, but I think voters changed their mind. But if you look at the actual margin, in the Democratic race, we were 1 percentage point off. In the Republican race, the margin between the two top candidates, we were actually at 0.4% at the last count. So
you're feeling pretty good.
Feeling pretty good about the margins, but obviously, you know, also want to look to the future to making sure that we improve the actual winners percentage that we project.
When you do a poll and you do an interview over the phone, you're not just asking who you're going to vote for. You're asking a lot of other data and a lot of other information, right? What are not just the demographic data, but what around things that might reflect what people are on people's minds, why the motivations of why they are voting the way they are, which then translates into the fall and ongoing basis. What kinds of questions were you trying to explore in that?
Well, I think primarily we were looking at the key issues, and what we found was overwhelmingly that the economy was the key issue. But the important point there is that the state is not a monolithic state in terms of a single issue meaning a single thing. There was a lot of talk about trade in the election among the two campaigns, but when you talk to Ohioans, many Ohioans aren't talking about trade. They're talking about unemployment not related to trade, higher wages, better benefits. There's a lot of economic issues that we heard about that were actually never addressed in the campaign. And I think that the polls that we saw that showed Hillary Clinton having an advantage on that economic issue, and the fact that it never blew out far beyond the trade issue, really helped her on election day. Many of those economy voters ended up casting votes for her.
Yeah, because the way it got talked about was all about NAFTA and this treaty and whether they would revise the treaty if they became president. Did you find that your voters were just, the people you were interviewing for the poll, just wanted to talk about NAFTA?
No, absolutely not. And in northern Ohio, in the northern tier, northeast especially, there was a lot of talk about NAFTA and trade, and you can't discount that. However, you don't hear a lot of talk about NAFTA on the streets of Cincinnati. Unemployment is lower here than in other parts of the state. There's a much broader discussion about wages, benefits, and so forth when it comes to the economy, and also gas prices, the prices in the grocery store, and so on.
You know, one of the things that I've heard people comment on, and I don't know if you have enough poll results, but you've been doing this for long enough, because this was a statewide poll. Mm-hmm. People are surprised, some people I'm talking to are surprised that Obama did so well in Hamilton County. Surprised to you?
Well, it was a target area for him, and he really concentrated a great effort. I would say going in that I thought Hillary Clinton had an advantage here, but there's no question that his campaign really set down here, worked very, very hard, and in the end, the results are the proof. They definitely outworked the Clinton campaign here, and you know, they got the votes to show for it.
They outspent them too.
Outspent them as well. Yep.
Knowing some of the TV buys they were doing, they were definitely were pouring dollars into this.
Right.
You know, one of the things one area, it's more talked about on the Republican side and in a weird way in the Democratic side, but what's the role of religion? Are you trying to figure that out in your polls?
We're looking very close at three issues, I think, and a fourth one I'll mention may emerge. We're looking very closely at issues of gender and race, and also of religion. I think now that John McCain is the nominee, there are going to be some questions about age that are interjected as we move closer to the fall. So we're not focused on one thing, we're actually focused on a number of things at once, and all of them, I think, ultimately are going to have some effect in the campaign. The question is going to be which is going to be the most important aside from issues.
Given where we are right now, we now shift to looking towards November, but we don't know who the Democratic candidate is. Have you done polling that indicates how well Senator Clinton would do against Senator McCain or Obama would do against McCain? Do you have any sense of that yet?
Well, we do, and I think it's very much going to be looking back to the future here in the fall. When you look at the past two presidential elections in the state, both the very close race and then the potential for a very close race, we see that potential again here this fall. I don't think there's much question that whichever candidate the Democrats ultimately choose, there's going to be a lot of Democratic backing for that candidate. I think ultimately Republicans will come out and vote for John McCain, at least at this point in time. Once again, I think we're looking at a tight race that comes down to that independent vote. We always end up talking about that small group of Ohioans who keep themselves politically independent, and they have decided more than their share of elections here in the state.
And we got to remember, we got a long time between now and the conventions, much less the election. A lot of things can happen still here. So how many more polls, we're just about out of time, but how many more polls do you think you'll be doing?
I would say at least 3 to 4, and we'll go from there.
And will there be one right before the November election?
You better believe it.
Well, we'll be watching. Thank you, Eric. Stay tuned. It started with a single $1 million gift by Charles and Anna Sinton Taft over 80 years ago. Now it depends on millions of small gifts. The Fine Arts Fund had its roots in 1927 with a major endowment gift by Charles and Anna Sinton Taft that created the Institute of Fine Arts. Since 1949, the Institute has run the Fine Arts Fund to support the vast array of Cincinnati art organizations that are distinctive elements of the region's character. That critical funding has encouraged the development of performing arts organizations like the symphony, the opera, as well as visual arts organizations like the Art Museum, the Contemporary Arts Center, and the Taft Museum of Art, that in 2004 completed a major renovation, expansion, and reinterpretation. Welcome back. In February, the Fine Arts Fund kicked off its annual fundraising effort by announcing a challenging goal of $12 million. Last year, the fund raised $11.7 million. The Fine Arts Fund distributes that money to 8 major arts organizations: the Art Museum, the Cincinnati Symphony, the Ballet, the Opera, the Playhouse in the Park, the Contemporary Arts Center, May Festival, and the Taft Museum of Art. Another 10 organizations, from the Carnegie Visual Arts and Performing Center in Covington to the Fitton Center in Hamilton, the Shakespeare Festival, and the Madcap Productions Puppet Theater and others, are also involved on a regular basis. I am now joined by Scott Provancher, the campaign director for the Fine Arts Fund. Scott, welcome to Cincinnati, and I apologize for not getting you on just as the fund, the drive kicked off, but we had this little thing called elections going on. So.
Yeah, I can imagine you're a little bit busy.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
But it was fun. How important is this drive to the organizations that draw support from the Fine Arts Fund? Is this just, something over on the side, or is this essential to these key organizations in our community?
Well, the Fine Arts Fund is a major driver in how these organizations operate each year. And one of the things that we do that I think is unique is that the dollars we raise throughout the community goes towards operating support, which is kind of the overhead and lighting and things that really aren't that sexy for folks to give to or put their name on. And for many of the organizations, we're anywhere from 10 to 20% of their operating budgets. So a pretty significant chunk. We're often the largest single donation that they receive.
Some people may not realize, and you were alluding to this, but having been in development for a while myself, raising money for bricks and mortar, raising money for a new program, that gets people's juices flowing, and you can get people to give you major dollars. But that year in, year out, just making these organizations work at their proper level, that's the hard money.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that the Fine Arts Fund does as well is work with the organizations and really kind of understand where their challenges are so that we can help them build capacity and grow, not just give the dollars out and then kind of walk away and say, we'll see you next year. And there's real accountability there in terms of, we have 44,000 donors that we feel the responsibility that their dollars need to really be moving the dial in terms of making the arts community stronger. So we have a allocations process that we take very seriously to really work with the organizations and make sure those dollars are making the impact that they should in the community.
What does that mean when the allocations committee, what does it look for? Does it look for creativity? Does it look for efficiency? Does it look at staff? What does it look at when it decides where this money goes?
Well, we learned kind of early on that it's really hard, and quite frankly, we don't have the experience on the artistic side to really gauge to say, is this product truly at a certain level they say it is. We're more on the financial side and the governance side, and is the board of directors overseeing the organization in the right ways? Are there things that can improve in terms of building broader audiences or being more regional, or directly from the finance standpoint? How are the finances of the organization? But we try to keep tabs on the overall organization and report back to our donors on how they're doing, and I think that's worked very well over time, and we have one of the strongest arts community in the entire country, and a lot of that has to do with the collaboration that happens as part of the Fine Arts Fund process.
You know, one of the things, and our viewers just got a chance to see it, but I'd like to show a chart again that we have that's part of your information. And this shows, you can see on the screen, this shows where the Fine Arts Fund contributions come from. And you can see that a couple of things that strike me here is when you say employees, you're talking about individuals. And then there's the corporate side, but employees in corporate, this Fine Arts Fund in this city is very much a job-based effort. It is not just sending mail out. It is really having the companies in our community put their energy into this.
Yeah, and that's really at the heart of how the Fine Arts Fund has grown and how it's unique within the country. 81% of the dollars that we raise come through either an employee campaign like United Way does in the workplace, or a corporate gift or a corporate matching program. And the amazing thing is that we're a fairly broad-based organization in terms of where we get our dollars from. 93% of our donors are giving less than $500, and our most common gift is $75. So these are not our campaign is not filled with only $25,000 annual contributors. We really are charged with trying to spread the word and the messages about the importance of the arts in the community, and trying to get folks geared up and have fun and get engaged.
And also give that sense of ownership for everybody in this community around the arts, organizations and efforts. One of the things that I think you've got this year that may help with this stretch goal of 12 million are a couple of matching grants. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And you know, the interesting thing is that both organizations, nonprofits, and companies are kind of our gateway to talking to individuals that work in those workplaces. And this year, Carl Lindner has kindly done a challenge to match any new employee campaign or new corporate gift. So we're really out kind of beating the bushes, trying to get new companies and new individuals engaged in the process. And what's so great about the match is it's a dollar-for-dollar match, any new gift that comes in that way. So if you're part of a new employee campaign within your company, those dollars are matched dollar for dollar. So,
you know, we're almost a month into the campaign at this point, not quite. How are things going? Where are you? Where do you stand? And I don't know if it's just an absolute number that's important, or compared with other years and the flow and the percentages, because we all know these things really take off at the end.
They do, and people say, wow, you're making great progress. We're about 40% there. And I say, well, the last 2% are the toughest dollars to raise. So we don't get too full of ourselves that we've already raised over $4 million towards a $12 million goal. But it's tracking fairly well. One thing that we look at is how are our campaigns and our general drive doing compared to last year, and as campaigns close out in the workplace, you know, did they raise more dollars than last year? And so far we've had really positive news. We've certainly were cautious in our overall goal of a 2% increase this year, knowing that there's some storm clouds kind of brewing out there in the economy that, you know, we don't want to get out and ahead of ourselves, and we want to be cognizant that you know, it might be tough for some folks, and we're really hoping that we'll continue to make arts a priority. So
I want to make clear, I tried to identify the big 8, a sort of a cross section of those that next 10 that are partners, but you also give money to very small organization on applications and grant basis, right?
Yeah, that's a really key part of the dollars that we give out. There's about 70 additional organizations that receive anywhere from a couple $1,000s to $20,000 in funding each year as part of that grants program, and that really helps kind of the broad arts community. A lot of it's project-based. A great example is Biakoto Drum and Dance Ensemble is one of the organizations we're working with a lot this year, and we try to make it as broad as possible.
Scott, I wanted to point out here at the end that you've got a great image, the Hamlet image, with the to support the arts or not support the arts. That should not be the question. So I want to let people know that if you would like more information about the Fine Arts Fund, go to the website, fineartsfund.org. And Scott, thank you for being here this morning, and good luck with the rest of the campaign.
Thank you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. With the primary election over, this has been a packed week. I want to thank all of you who tuned in Local 12 on election night, making our coverage the most watched in the tri-state. Next week, a national political operative with Cincinnati roots reflects on the state of American politics. Have a good week.